he's offered his whites to me, and it looks like everything's there, looks good. So he's going to start with the formal request for Anagārika ordination.
Sambadho gharavaso rajopatho abhokaso pabaja naidang sukarang agarang ajhavasata ekanta paripunang ekanta parisudhang sankhalikitang brahmacharyang charitum yang nunahang ke samasung oharitava kasayani vadhani adhaditava agarasama anagariyam pavajayam. The household life is cramped and dusty. The homeless life is free as air. It is not easy living the household life, to live the fully perfected holy life, purified and polished like a conch shell. Suppose I were to shave off my hair and beard, don the robes of a Buddhist monastic, and go forth from the household life into homelessness.
Okay, so you can come forward and take these whites and then go put them on. Maybe somebody skilled in the pavillon can also help. So Mike has gone to put his whites on. He's been here for 5 or 6 months now, maybe about 6 months. And so having requested Anagārika precepts, Anagārika ordination, it's the 8 precepts, which he's been following already, but making more of a commitment in a monastic form in the whites. And generally the progression of becoming a bhikkhu, becoming a monk at Abhayagiri, you're in Anagārika for 1 year. Then if that year goes well and one wants to continue on, then it's requesting samanera ordination or novice ordination. And that's where one would put on brown robes. So like there's 2 samaneras here. We have Tejasaro and Obasi, and they don't have sangatis yet. They don't have the 3rd robe. The bhikkhus get the sangati. So the way you tell the novices and the bhikkhus apart is that the bhikkhus in these pujas, these ceremonies, we have our sangatis, we have the outer robe. They just have the jiwan, which is the regular robe. And so then that's 1 year, and after that year then they can request bhikkhu ordination. And there's a Buddha image in the dining hall, which used to be our main Dhamma hall until we built this new building. Now this is the main Dhamma hall. So the dining hall still has that original Buddha image in it with the fearless, what we call the fearless mudra, with one hand up. And Ajahn Chah would say that's 5 years. If you request bhikkhu ordination, the Buddha's saying 5 years. And that you make a commitment if you want to request bhikkhu ordination. So you're prepared for, of course, if it's going really awful or something, then you don't have to stay 5 years. You can, disrobing it is very easy. It's not mandated as a lifetime commitment once you take bhikkhu ordination, but once you take bhikkhu ordination, you are bound by the 227 precepts and this detailed code of conduct, what we call the Vinaya, and then 5 years is generally what's considered Nisaya, or dependence, and after that you're considered, that's like your basic training period. Then you'll be well-versed in the Vinaya, well-versed in the discipline. It'll be like second nature for you to follow that, and there is something to that. I could see after 5 years, there was kind of a shift there in terms of being well-versed in Vinaya and in the Dhamma as well, knowing the teachings and knowing how to live with them, having it be internalized. So really, you could say the period of basic training is 7 years. It's 1 year as an Anagārika, 1 year as a novice, 5 years as a bhikkhu. But disrobing, it's according to Vinaya, one only has to say, I leave, or I'm done. And there has to be a witness, another human being. And that's it. So we say it's hard to join, easy to leave. And we do have this kind of long preliminary training period to become bhikkhus. But also Ajahn Chah would say if you make it easy for them to join, then if you make it quick, so if you make the joining period, if you make the preliminary training period quick, then people will leave quick. So if you make it, if you ordain quickly, then you disrobe quickly. But if it takes a long time to ordain, then you tend to stay a bit longer. And if one ends up leaving or disrobing, then someone can actually come back too. You can reordain, but you start over again with your seniority at the beginning of the line, which for some people that might be difficult, and some people might actually consider that a good thing. Senior monks might be tempted to disrobe and reordain right away just so they don't have to do all these teachings and have all these duties. Not that I'm thinking of. The Anagārikas have kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out of monasticism. They can still use money. That's one thing. If someone takes novice ordination, you give up the use of money. And now that Mike is in his whites, he'll be formally requesting the 8 precepts. Put it down and then bow. And the white robe that now Anagārika Mike is wearing is called pavillon. It's kind of like a training robe.
Ahang bante tisaranena saha arthasilani achami titiyampi ahang bante tisaranena saha arthasilani achami tatiyampi ahang bante tisaranena saha arthasilani achami.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dhammang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami.
Ti sarana kamanang nititang.
Amabante.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature.
Adina dana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Adina dana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given.
Abrahmacharya veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Abrahmacharya veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from any intentional sexual activity.
I undertake the precept to refrain from any intentional sexual activity.
Musawada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Musawada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying.
Sura meraya maja pamadatana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Sura meraya maja pamadatana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness.
Vikala bhojana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Vikala bhojana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from eating at inappropriate times.
I undertake the precept to refrain from eating at inappropriate times.
Nacha gita varita visukkadasana mala gandha vilepana dharana mandana vibhusanatana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
Nacha gita varita visukkadasana mala gandha vilepana dharana mandana vibhusanatana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from entertainment, beautification, and adornment.
I undertake the precept to refrain from entertainment, beautification, and adornment.
Ucca sayana mahasayana hoera mani sika parang samadhiyami.
Uchasayana Mahasayana Veramani Sikapadam Samadhyami.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place.
I undertake the precept to refrain from lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place.
Imani yata sikapadani samadhiyami.
Imani Yatha Sikapadani Samadhyami. Imani Yatha Sikapadani Samadhyami. Imani Yatha Sikapadani Samadhyami.
Imani yata sikapadani silena sugating yante silena bhoga sampada silena nibuting yanti tasama silang viso tatye. You can sit and puppy up. That goes under the armpit. Yeah, that's how you hold it there. So yeah, now you're in your whites, very good, and they're very bright and beautiful and flowing. And that part of the mindfulness practice will be keeping them white as long as possible, and you'll get to know about using bleach. That's one way we keep our whites white. And but they inevitably, if you work really hard and work in the kitchen and so on, they end up turning brown. And when they end up turning brown, then you'll probably be ready for novice ordination. That's what Ajahn Amaro would say, that once the Anagārika gets baked, once he's baked, then he's ready. He's ready to go on to the next step. So we'll throw you into the oven, and or it's like Ajahn Mun would say, that the training is like what the teacher does is they heat you up, or what the community does is you take on the training. You wanna come to the monastery and live peacefully in the forest. So people have that intention. I wanna come and live peacefully in the forest, have a nice, peaceful, perhaps laid back life in the forest. But then you come to the monastery and it's not really what you thought. And then what the community does is they say, okay, he wants to be forged into a good, upright individual, and actually call into question the hindrances and obstructive states in the heart, which are truly obstructing us to true peace and true ease. So what that is it's like the community takes you and heats you up, and so you get heated up, and it's like a piece of iron being put into a forge, and it gets heated up, and then once it's just like really hot, then it gets slammed with hammers. So but then what can happen is it then becomes forged into something useful, like a very sharp blade, which can then cut through anything. But that takes some time. So just that is part of the process. And the precepts, the way we relate to the precepts, and as you know from being here already, if one of the precepts gets transgressed, they're not like commandments, but they are training guidelines for the community, and it's the way we form things in the community here. So if something gets broken, for example, if you eat in the afternoon or something, you would come tell me or another senior monk, and when we reveal or tell somebody something, that's considered the confession, is just revealing it, and then and retaking that precept, and then going on and trying to not do it again. So the Anagārika year is for like really internalizing those 8 precepts, which are actually just the spirit of the 10 and the 227 precepts. The 8 precepts are just, we could say as bhikkhus, we're just following a bigger version of the 8 precepts. So that's really the samana ideal, or the renunciate precepts. So yeah, the refraining from taking of life, that's quite self-explanatory. We get trained to be more careful around things like we don't swat flies or whatever. We don't kill wasps or insects or creepy crawly things if we see them. Of course, bigger animals, that no needless to say about that. And although in the Theravada or in the Vinaya, meat is allowable to accept as food if it's not seen, heard, or suspected that it was killed specifically for us. But if it was what somebody had and what they decided to offer, then it's allowable according to Vinaya. And then if the second precept, refraining from taking what's not given, that's not stealing, so just whatever accrues to the community, or if, say as an Anagārika, still being able to use money, you'll be pretty much looking after yourself with your own money, still having a car, but then there will be certain things. You will also be acting as a steward for the monastery, so you might be asked to, say, like, use the monastery funds for monastery business from time to time, or whatever, things like that. And then only when one becomes a novice does one then give up the assets and become dependent on the monastery. So you're learning about taking what's not given, but you can still get things yourself a little bit. You still have that access to money. But if there is any need for, say, requisites that do exist in the monastery, like some whites or something that you need, then you can request that from the monastery, like white cloth to make a jacket, for example. That's something you can request from the monastery. The brahmacharya, the celibacy, that's the third precept. So that's the stronger than the 5 precepts, whereas the 5 precepts is, I will refrain from sexual misconduct, meaning like not cheating on your partner, having integrity in relationships. But the brahmacharya is the full celibacy, so that's ramping it up a little bit and tightening the container. And so that also takes time to internalize that, and that does get difficult. So we learn how to train the mind and use our practice, take refuge in the meditation, take refuge in awareness of things that are happening, rather than moving the awareness into sensuality. So it's actually like extracting, we say, like pulling a hair out of a pat of butter, extracting the mind from sensuality. It's the third precept. And then it's actually interesting that, although we're like an ad hoc group of guys here in the monastery, we actually in the Theravada have some of the strictest celibacy rules of any religion or group in the entire world. And so that's definitely a point of pride, just because it's so clear. The Vinaya is just so clear, like, of what is and isn't a breach of the rules. And we're greatly blessed to have that, but it also is difficult. So it does take time to really, internalize these things. And then it's the musawada. We translate, the new translation of it is, I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. The old translation, which I kind of prefer, but it's not quite as clear as just like, I will refrain from lying, which is very clear. It's, I will refrain from false and harmful speech. So false speech is fourfold. I will refrain from lying. I'll refrain from harsh speech. I'll refrain from divisive speech. I'll refrain from idle chatter. And so that's the fourfold purity of speech. Of course, lying or honesty is the most important of those 4, but the others are quite important as well. Sura Meriya, the refraining from intoxicants. The literal translation of that one is alcohol. So the Buddha called alcohol the basis of negligence. on taking intoxicants. Of course, things like marijuana or LSD or whatever hallucinogens are not allowed. In the monastery, we allow more benign things like coffee and tea. Those are allowable. You could say those are allowable drugs for us. Or if we're sick or ill, Ajahn Kurdadamo talked about this in his talk this morning, that things like morphine, if one has a severe injury or something like that, those become allowable at the right time. But the refraining from intoxicants, and there is kind of a movement these days of different intoxicants such as psilocybin used for not just for spiritual purposes, but for like curing severe depression. That's something and the most extreme one I heard about is licking poisonous toads to cure severe depression. They call it toad venom, and it's a new drug. It's all the craze. But anyway, we don't do that here. If anybody offers it to you, then you're to refuse it. But it is something that is being used these days for like curing severe depression or trauma, PTSD, things like that. But we use the meditation to cure those types of things or work with that. The Vikalabhojana, that's the refraining from eating at inappropriate times, defined in the Vinaya as dawn to midday. Literally, according to Vinaya, it's the sun's zenith is the cutoff point for eating. So, but we make these arbitrary rules in the monastery. So, like right now, it's dawn, which is roughly 6:30 a.m. to noon as the cutoff for eating. But if there's like some situation, you're traveling or something, somebody's offered a meal, it's like a little bit past 12. You kind of got to look at the sun. Okay, is it at the zenith? Technically, that would be the cutoff for midday. So that changes obviously throughout the year. There's the refraining from entertainment, beautification, and adornment. That's, say, we don't watch TV, watch movies, except on very rare occasions. And the, say, watching TV, listening to music, just the normal outlets that we have for distraction. So that's one of the renunciate precepts. Precepts 6, 7, and 8, the Vikalabhojana, or not eating at inappropriate times, the entertainment, beautification, adornment, the not lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place. Those are the renunciate precepts, which is, it's not, say, karmically negative things, but they're simplifying your life. And so just not having those normal avenues for distraction, but actually having to see what's the mind craving at any given moment, and how can we deal with that directly, looking at the dissatisfaction or the dukkha of that, and then seeing if we can develop the resources to have a sense of peace that's not dependent on external things, but that we can actually take refuge in awareness. And the 8th one, the Ujjasayana Mahasayana, refraining from lying on a high or luxurious sleeping place. Most of us will just, the Vinaya is a bed with legs no longer than 8 finger breadths, which is roughly 8 inches. And so even in our most comfortable dwelling places in the quadplex, there was some nice beds offered for that, but if you measure the legs, they're about that. They're about 8 finger breadths, although the mattresses themselves are, I think, even thicker than that. But it's still allowable by Vinaya. So, and for us in our kutis, in our dwelling places, it's normally just a mat on the floor. Sometimes people use a thermarest. It depends on your needs. Some people will use a yoga mat as their sleeping mat, but not to give too much attention to one's sleeping place. By worldly standards, we should be sleeping 8 hours a night. The monastic standard, we take it down to about 6, and that seems to work for most people. 5, 6, 7, somewhere around there, 6 as kind of an average. That works with a meditative and a very clean, healthy lifestyle. And the not making the sleeping place too comfortable or too warm. It doesn't need to be overly ascetic. For example, I find sleeping on a hard surface is better for my back, and if I sleep on too soft of a surface, I get back and neck pain. So sometimes it can actually be better for you as well. So there is something to that simplicity. Also, it's said in the Tudong monk lore that if you go to the dwelling place of a great Tudong monk, you won't know where they sleep. So it won't be apparent. They won't have a big disheveled bed, off to one side or something, and it'll be very immaculate in their dwelling place. Normally we have bedding that we can say roll up in the morning and put away or something like that. And then the dwelling place is not really, it's not like it might be like this sometimes, but not usually that you say walk up to your kuti after the meal and just sort of fall over into a bed. And you'll actually have to, if you want to take a rest, you'll have to get your bedding out, unroll it, set it up, and then put it away neatly afterwards. So that's the 8th precept. It also hints at not overindulging in sleep. So it's hinting at all those principles. There was also it's the refuges and precepts. So the refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the Buddha, of course, being the historical Buddha, Dhamma being the Buddha being the teacher who lived over 2,500 years ago and at the time of the Enlightenment became the Buddha and started the Dhamma Vinaya and had the whole 45 years of teaching, the Buddha's dispensation, and the Dhamma being the teaching itself, Sangha being the community who followed, both the monastic and the lay community. Those are what we call the external refuges. Then there's the internal refuges, that's Buddha as awareness or knowing, and these are much more important. So that's that taking refuge in the meditation, taking refuge in awareness, and that clear awareness of what's taking place, that reflective awareness of what's happening at any given time. That's the internal refuge of Buddha. Dhamma is truth of the way things are, and we say the Buddha knows the Dhamma, so the knowing, the awareness knows the truth of the way things are at any given moment. The 5 khandhas, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, how are they at any given moment? Sangha, the internal refuge of Sangha is virtue, and so internalizing the precepts. We say sila is what we translate as virtue, but we don't actually, the precepts are not the sila, the precepts are what we call the sikkhapada, or the training guidelines for our own training and learning. But what we call sila, or virtue, is an internal quality that we develop based on the precepts. And that's an internal integrity where the mind might actually resist the precepts sometimes, but then we get to a point where the mind is in line with the precepts or not resisting, and that's the sila when it gets actually internalized. So the internal refuge of Sangha is the sila itself. So that's 3 refuges and the 8 precepts. The next part of the ceremony is the formal taking of dependence, so I'll invite you to start with that now. You can just start with the Namo Tassa.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Acharyo me bhante hohi ayasmato nisaya vachami. Acharyo me bhante hohi ayasmato nisaya vachami. Acharyo me bhante hohi ayasmato nisaya vachami.
Opayikang
Sadhu bhante.
pati rupang
Sadhu bhante.
pasadikena sampadehi
Sadhu bhante. Ajatagedani tero Maihang bharo, aham pitera sabharo. Ajatagedani tero, maihang bharo, aham pitera sabharo. Ajatagedani tero, maihang bharo, aham pitera sabharo.
Okay. And just to speak briefly on the taking of a dependence, that's the formal, say like a student or you're taking dependence on me, but you're also taking dependence on the other senior monks, Ajahn Krunadamo, who's going to be around, and Longpor when he's here, and the community. It's kind of like people will be pointing out things to you. As in Anagārika, you'd be eating out of a bowl now with the community in the dining halls, so you'll be learning about things such as looking after the monks' bowls and helping out in the bowl washing area, and so on. So there'll be some new things to learn, and people will be helping you out, pointing things out to you about that. And for people gathered here also, the Acharyo me bhante hohi, that's Acharya. Acharya is the Pali word meaning teacher, and the Thai version is Ajahn. So senior monks get called Ajahn. That comes from the Pali Acharya. Acharyo me bhante hohi ayasamato nisaya wachami. So it's like, may the Venerable One be my teacher. I request you be my teacher. And then I say three things. I say opayikang, which is something like, it is good. Pati rupang, it is useful. Pasadikena sampadehi, it'll be good, or something like that. It's three different ways of saying it's all good. And then ajatage dani tero maihang baro, ahampi tera sabaro, that's now from this day forward. I am a burden of the Venerable One, of the Tera. Tera means elder, meaning over 10 years as a monk. I am a burden of the Tera, and the Tera is my burden. So it's like, you're going to look after me, I'll look after you, and you'll also help look after me in various ways. Or the community will look after you, and you'll help look after the community in various ways, as you've already been doing with your time here so far. And I could also say something about the original phrase you chanted, Sambado Garawa, so and so on. What if I were to shave off my hair and beard, don the robes of a Buddhist monastic, and so forth? That's a phrase that comes from the suttas, and although you're not yet putting on the robes of a Buddhist monastic, you are putting on the white robes of the Anagārika, but we take that phrase, I believe that comes from Ajahn Jayasaro, came up with that version of the Anagārika ordination. Some different monasteries will have different versions, like the Anagārika ordination, it's not a Vinaya ordination or necessarily a sutta-based ordination, but it's just each monastery comes up with it, with their own form of it. But I quite like this form, is like that first step. It's the Anagārika ordination is what I think of as the first gate. There's 3 gates of ordination. It's the first gate. You got through that first gate of ordination. And so we say sadhu to that, and may your training go well. So.